Hello, I'm Stuart Preston, and this is the Stoned Ape Reports, where I have conversations with those who have changed their lives with the power of psychedelics. In this episode, I had the honor of speaking with Tara. Tara is a licensed professional counselor who shared her ayahuasca story of rebirth and finding joy within herself. And it wasn't easy. So let's hear from Tara. Thank you so much for coming here on the Stoned Ape Reports. I'm really excited to talk to you because we've had a couple interactions talking about psychedelics and integration work, and some of the things we've done here and discovered your work as a therapist. And so what I'd like to start off with is number one, thank you for coming, and number two, give us a real quick introduction of who you are and what you do.
Oh, you're welcome. Thanks for I was very stoked when you asked me if I wanted to do it, because I think I mentioned in our message, like I was so excited. Like I've been meaning to kind of branch out more from just the private practice I do and talk about my experience using ayahuasca, which it's only been a couple of times, but I really felt like after, let me rewind a little bit. A licensed professional counselor. I have my own private practice in New Jersey, right, same area that I grew up in. And I had always had a history of my own anxiety, depression growing up. It runs in my family. Now, unlike a lot of people, I don't actually have a ton of trauma. Like this one has sexual trauma. This one's dad beat him up. Like I have a really great family. I'm close with both of my parents. Oddly enough, I'm one of those females who have sexual trauma, it's rare. So, but I still felt like, I'm carrying all this stuff. Like, I'm also very sensitive. Most people who are in this field, like other, teachers, nurses, therapists, like there's a level of sensitivity to us that I feel like a lot of people don't want to admit because it can be a vulnerability, or it can be interpreted as a vulnerability. But I'm like, hell no, that's where your power is, So I had, I was, tired of dealing with my own emotions and stuff. And I had left my husband in like the end of 2018. I'll talk about that a bit, but I'm not like, oh, he's this horrible person, So it's nothing like that. It just, we weren't meant to keep going on the same path together. And, when I had first left, I was like, okay, this is good. I'm going to do me. It's the same thing that happens to everybody, right? Like I'm going to do me, and that's it. Like I had no interest in like dating anybody or anything else after that. I was like, it's time to focus on Tara. And then after like 2 months, 3 months, I was like, I felt this like heaviness like setting in, and I'm like, what happened? Like I was like so confident a couple months ago, and what's going on? So I had actually had a client come into my office, and he was so depressed. Like I was actually worried he might, harm himself. And one day he came in, and his face, like, he looked like a different person. He's like, I'm feeling better. And I could just see, energetically on someone's face, you don't even need to, they just look different regardless of what they look like when they get better. Right. So I was like, he's like, I did ayahuasca. And I was like, please go on, because this man just looked, it looked like his twin, the happy twin. And he told me the story, and I was like, because I had heard of it years ago. I think it was like on Joe Rogan, of course, right? I was in the car with my dad, and I was like, oh, that sounds cool. Or my dad was like, yeah, it's kind of crazy, whatever. And then like years ago, and I was like, oh, maybe one day I would do it. I've always been into like this, kind of stuff. So when he told me, I was like, because like I was suffering too. Like it's really hard to be suffering when you're a therapist. People are like, how did you do it? And I'm like, well, first of all, I didn't have a choice. And like, it's not, I didn't live at home to where I could just quit and whatever. And plus, what do you do with all your clients when you're going through some intense stuff, So I was like, I need to find this. So I'm like intensely Googling, like, where can I find it? And, where is it legal? Am I going to like die if I do it? Like what happens if you're like a sensitive person? And of course it's like, you're just more frustrated, right? Because you get every answer from like oh, I'm peaceful now to I am now schizophrenic. So like
Right.
you get everything across the spectrum. And I was like, you know what? Like I'm doing this anyway because I'm so miserable now that if I don't do like at this point, it's like I'm just gonna do it because I can't be in this space anymore, like where I was at.
Yeah.
So I was like, it's worth a shot, you know. So I was like, I go to Peru, I don't know, like by myself. Like, and I was like, I don't want to tell my parents because like they were gonna worry about me. So like Googling like crazy, finally Soul Quest in Orlando came up, which is you know, it's a legal, like they're filed like DEA exemption. I don't know all the I don't want to speak for them, but it's, you know,
Yeah.
it's a legal place. So I found it. I'm like, cool, it's in Florida. So I told my parents, I was like, I'm gonna go to an all-female yoga retreat in Florida. Like I made up this whole because
Yeah.
my father is very, you know, he's one of those people that he's like very scared. Like if you leave the United States, he thinks that you're gonna get murdered. I'm like, Dad, like not every like I know a lot of people hate us, but like not everyone wants to kill me, you know.
Yeah.
He's like, can you just stay here? And I'm like, I like to travel, but so I'm like, all right, obviously he's scared that like someone's gonna like kidnap me or something. So I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
all female yoga retreat. And I even went, it's like ridiculous. Now, when I think of the lengths I went to not share,
Yeah.
which actually was a really good example of what the problem was. There was like a lack of communication and me being comfortable enough to say, this is what I'm doing.
Yeah.
So, and it is actually really funny. I even found a yoga retreat in Florida and my sister's like, oh, which one are you going to? And I was like, this one. And then she writes back to me and she goes, she's like, not that I'm against it. Whatever you want to do is fine. She goes, but it looks like it's all for Black women. Like I didn't I didn't research it enough. And I was like,
Right.
oh no, that just must be the picture. Like it, you know, you don't only have to be Black. So
Funny.
yeah, long story. I mean, I go down there, I have this massive, I actually had a brutal experience, you know, for a lot of reasons. It was really harsh. But once everything was said and done with, the next day I had, you know, what I call a rebirth. I was literally like in the back room of, I kind of had isolated myself. Everybody else was like, oh, love and happiness. And I was like, this sucks. Like, why is everyone else like having all these beautiful moments? And here I am. I just felt like I got my ass kicked. And I did. I really got my ass kicked. And so I was like, what the heck? Like I came here to do this and I didn't even better and blah, blah, blah. So I was like, you know, I'm going to go lay down and I'm going to just breathe because I was actually getting really anxious. And I'm like, okay, I'm going to breathe and just try to ground myself. And I was like, screw this. So I went in the back. I started doing some belly breathing. At this point, like everything, you know, the ayahuasca had worn off, you know, but I was just so frustrated that like, you know, everyone's like hugging and, oh, okay, I'll see you on Facebook.
Yeah.
And I'm like, damn it, I didn't get what I came here for.
I mean, did you get like nothing, or did you get some kind of a negative experience? Whatever you're comfortable sharing. I know people are going to be thinking they're considering doing something like this, and they kind of hear your story. That because I've been there also at ceremonies where, you know, I'm not getting anything sometimes, or maybe I'm getting something different. But I look around the room and everybody's like having this great euphoric, you know, experience. But so, what was your experience kind of like? If you know, whatever you're comfortable sharing about it.
Yeah, I could talk forever about that. How much time do you have?
Yeah.
Actually, okay, so it did end up, well, I'll finish that part really quick and then I'll go back. So I went in the back room. I'm like, oh, man, I'm like, of course, everyone's better. And I'm, you know, I feel like shit and I have to go, you know, back to New Jersey the same way. And so it was the last day and I was pissed off. I went to go lay down, do some belly breathing. And out of like nowhere, I had this like rush. And again, ayahuasca had worn off. It was the next day. I had this like intense, like I was overcome with this like, I don't know if I want to say joy, but I just, at that point I was laying on my back on the bed with my knees up doing the belly breathing. A lot of people like to sit up when they do it. I just prefer to lay down. It's easier on the diaphragm to do like that kind of breath work. And I started going like, like I didn't know what was happening, but I knew that I liked it, and I felt like I was giving birth. And
Wow.
I've never been pregnant. I don't have kids. And I didn't know what it was, but I knew it felt right. And I was just I just kind of started off like kind of thing. And I felt like I just got this rush of like joy. And I was like, oh, fucking finally, like I've been here for like three friggin' days. Everyone's Jesus, hugging and crying. And I'm like panicking and getting angry. And I knew that I didn't know what I was doing, but I knew I had to keep breathing. I just kept like doing that kind of breath work. And of course it wasn't like real labor. There's zero pain at all. And at one point I had reached behind me, like each of the pillows, and I grabbed onto the two corners of the pillows. And I was like, do I push now? Like, what am I doing? Like, I'm not even pregnant. I don't know what's happening, but it just feels right. So I like grabbed onto the back of the pillow, and I'm looking at, of course, in front of me, I could see my thighs, and I'm looking at my legs, and I had this awareness that they were my legs, but they were also my mother's legs, because my face, I look a lot like my mother. We have the same like fingers, and like our bodies are similar, except I'm like 6 inches taller than she is. So I'm looking and I'm like, I think I'm my mom giving birth to me. I don't know. I was like, this feels awesome. So I'm rolling with it. I had a shit weekend. I'm rolling with this. It feels good. I don't care. So I was feeling like, and then I'm like, all right, like what's the end result? What's happening? And something came into my head, like at that moment was, I don't need my mother. I can do this by myself. And so then I felt like I was supposed to tell people that. And the psychologist, Dr. Scott at SoulQuest, I love him so much. At that point, he was running I think it was like an inner child group. Like I didn't know what was going on. They were like drawing and stuff. There was a few people, maybe like 6 to 8 people at a table. So I opened the door and like they're mid group. And I'm like, I feel like I'm supposed to tell you guys that I don't need my mom and I can do this myself. And then everybody just went, yay. And then like, Dad just kind of looks at me like I'm running a group here. But it was kind of funny. I had like squatted down. Like I didn't feel like I was like done. So I kind of like squatted on the floor. Like I was like in labor or something. And it was just so funny. He just looks at me like, oh, somebody else giving birth, so he must be so used to like this happening. And then someone else comes over, like one of the other participants, if you want to call them that. He's like, do you need an ambulance or something? I was almost kind of annoyed, like, no, Jesus Christ, I'm having a baby. Can't you see that? Like, oh, you're ruining, you're interfering. And I went back in the room, and what came over me was like, I don't need anything outside of myself. Like I don't need any. I don't need anxiety meds. I don't need antidepressants. I don't need any people. I only need me. And it felt like true freedom. Like to me, like to not need anyone or anything is true freedom. And I was like, oh my God, I finally got my bliss. And I love the feeling that I got that like you were right all along. It's not bullshit. Like you can be happy. This isn't a fairy tale that like, oh, after 25 life is shit. Or whatever age people think. And then it, of course, started to fade because you can't function like that forever, right? You can't be in this place forever. Right. And I went kind of back to the state of mind I was in before. And I'm like, I don't understand what's happening. So like, that's the point whenever they tell you, when we first sat down in the circle and they're like, listen, like you could drink the ayahuasca, but you still have to do the work. And at the time, like, I didn't know what that meant. But going home, I was like, okay, like, ayahuasca showed me like this is what you can feel like when you go home and do this. Like you have the potential to feel this way, but we're not just going to give it to you. Like you need to earn this. I had so much stuff I had to work through, and so it was kind of hard. And then I actually ended up, I stayed for a couple more days because I was grappling with the experience that I did this to myself, like through either like negative thinking, not listening to myself enough, not loving myself enough. I was like, because I don't know. I mean, you've experienced like with like the downloads, which I know sounds like I don't know if you've gotten like, you get like realizations or ideas that come to you.
Well, I've gotten big lessons. I don't know that I felt like it was a download from someplace else. It felt more like an internal revelation.
Yeah, no, oh my God. And I'll get back to this too. It was information that was coming into me like faster than I could keep up with. I'm like, do I write this down? Do I just sit with it? Like, what am I supposed to do? But I had so much, like, I was like, it was just a lot because I had realized I kind of did this to myself, and it was just, I was completely like bombarded. So I was kind of upset, and then I was like, I don't know if I can. I was also up because I didn't sleep well. I was up for like days, which me on a normal day, just getting one crappy night's sleep is horrendous. So after like 3 days or 4 days, like I was just like a Looney Tunes. So I had called my dad, and I was like, I'm going to stay another day. And then they were like, what's going on? And then my sister, who nothing gets by her, I think she whispered to my dad, like, because I had been kind of talking about it before I left. Did you do ayahuasca? And I was like, yes, I did. And it felt good to just like let it out, And another thing, like I had been like I said, I wasn't in a great place before I left. And I said to my dad, who I never talked about, and I'm sure he knew, like, okay, like at some point in my life, I had smoked pot, but we didn't have like an open relationship at that point where I could be like, okay, I smoke pot or whatever. But I had said, like, I had him on the phone. I was like, I just want to come home and smoke a fucking joint. And he very casually and calmly said, and that's what you have to do then. And I was like, ugh. So like, that was another big lesson for me. Like, just say it, just say what you need. So even in that, like, there was a lesson, like, just talk to your parent. But it just blew my, and then he's like, Tara, you're in your late 30s. He's like, if you want to go do this, you don't need our permission. And I'm like, well, I knew you guys were going to be at my ass, like worrying about me and like calling, and that would be a distraction from what I was trying to do, He would
have laid like a pre-guilt trip on you, possibly.
Yeah, it's like, I don't want to.
If you told him all this before you went, he may have been like, no, you can't do that. Ayahuasca is dangerous, and you're going to Florida and alligators.
My mom would have Googled it. My sister would have Googled it. Like, I pictured like my dad standing in front of the plane in Newark Airport, like, she's not going.
Right.
So, I mean, and maybe that a lot of that was a creation on my part of,
you don't know.
Who knows? So, I came back, and it was really hard because it's like, like I was surrounded by people who were like, wait, how do you say it? What is it called? Like, people didn't even know what it was, let alone how to, integrate the experience. And one of the volunteers there that I had talked to was like, you need to call this girl, Angela. And he gave me her number. He's like, she's absolutely amazing. She's a coach. I worked with her. So I took the number, and, of course I didn't end up calling her until a couple of months later when I was still losing it because I didn't know how to integrate my experience, and that's something that I would like to put out there too. Like, there's kind of an illusion, and I believed it too when I first got into this. Like, you go and then you drink it, and then you're just cured of like, everything magically, and like that's the end of it. So it's like, no, I want to tell people, like, if you have a hard time when you come back, like most people do. The coach I work with, she's like 90% of people will slip back. Because you need to do the work. It's not a magic cure. It's not like, it just doesn't work that way. So yeah, it took me some time, and it was very hard. I realized I was so rigid in my beliefs. Like, I was like, oh, I'm this great person who can, not great, like I'm great at helping others, but I was like, I was so patient with others, but I wasn't patient with myself at all, which my coach, which she later told me, she said, this is like a self-abuse. And when she put it like that, like if I had a kid, like I'd never hit my kid, right? So why am I doing this to me?
Right.
So you really have to parent yourself now. Like, and I was able to integrate this into my experience with my clients in private practice. It helped me become a better therapist from doing ayahuasca. So yeah, it's hard work, the only fun part I would say of ayahuasca was when I had the blissful part of it. Maybe when I was laying by the fire pit, and it looks kind of cool for a second, but
yeah.
That's
what people talk about. There's and I don't want to discourage, put down anybody's experience on any of this stuff, but out there on the internet and places, you just hear everybody talking about, oh, cool visuals, and I saw this, and I feel like so much of it, maybe some visuals, and I've had visuals that ended up being an allegory or an analogy for some big important lesson, but in general, I'm almost not interested in the fractals. I'm almost like, nah, go away. You know what I mean? I need to get to this other stuff. I know with ayahuasca, sometimes they say the visuals are a gate, and you have to go through the gate, to get to see La Madre and then get your messages delivered to you. But yeah, sometimes the visuals part of it, I feel like a lot of people are focused on this cool roller coaster part as opposed to the deep insight that might come with it.
Right. And I had also, like, before then, I had never even done like mushrooms, like nothing. Like,
Yeah.
I went
That was
from
your very first psychedelic experience.
Yeah, I went from like weed to ayahuasca.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was honestly just never interested in it before. I was like, all right, like alcohol's good enough, I'll have a couple of drinks, maybe smoke pot. Like, I don't need drug, I'd never done like coke or anything like that.
Right.
Just I never felt drawn to it. But yeah, everybody has to, some people are like, you need the visuals, you don't need the visuals, you need to feel, you don't need to feel. Like, there's some, again, like the technicalities can be like overwhelming.
Yeah.
But so that's why it's like sometimes it's just really better to not research the place you're going, but don't research 8 million stories of other people, because I had expectations. This girl I researched did this, so that's going to happen to me too. Like, or this guy had, aliens come do surgery on him. Maybe they'll come do surgery on me,
Yeah. Yeah. Even experiences, your birth experience. And I've had friends in ceremony who didn't give birth, but they were reborn, right? They literally came out of their mother's womb right there in the room, And I had that sometimes. I'm like, well, why don't I get reborn? And you start setting these expectations of your own thing, which is really the last thing you want to do. You really want to be able to go in completely open. That's my friend of mine gave me the best advice. She said, don't say just let go. Don't try to let go. Just say, I don't know. I don't know what's going to happen. And then you kind of free your mind from all that stuff.
I watched every YouTube video prior to going. And I mean, the bonus of that was that there were some good stories that I did hear. And I actually connected with one girl. I messaged her because we talked for a little bit. Her story kind of helped me. So we actually went back and forth on like Instagram for a little bit, talking about it. But yeah, it's hard. I think it's one of those things where, like, learning how to walk, like you're going to bust your ass. Like, it's, maybe you'll have an easier time than others, but working with this kind of stuff, like, you're going to make mistakes. Like, it's just so, it's not like we're all living in the jungle or somewhere where we're more in touch with like nature and things like that.
Right.
We're in a much more overstimulated world. So it's going to take us longer to get, grounded enough, for a lot of us. But, yeah, so
it's such a bit that mindset, going into it. Everybody talks about set and setting, set is mindset, and it's, you've got people like me, the very rational minded, almost engineer brains, that are like, well, I don't believe all this kooky stuff, and I'm going to go and experience this, and I'm going to analyze it and understand. And you have some people who come in that have meditated for a decade, and their minds are already part of the greater consciousness and the oneness and all this stuff, and they can flow into so much. So going into it, you're right. What you're saying is there's so many different mindsets coming into it that to go and try to figure out what somebody else experienced and try to lay that on your own predictions and your own expectations, it's going to shape your experience in a way that you may not want it to. So if you can find a way to just go in and let it happen with a proper mindset, then you might come out with more lessons.
Right. Hey, you live and learn, right?
Yeah, exactly.
But yeah, so that was a rough. I described that year for me and that experience as terrifying and beautiful. at the same time. It really was terrifying and beautiful. But
Yeah.
but yeah, going back, I don't know, like, so did you want me to talk about the brutal? I mean, there's the things that I saw that were brutal. Like, there's a significance to everything. It wasn't like it was brutal for nothing.
Yeah. I mean, if you want to, you just mentioned how when you went through the ceremony that, your experience was terrifying and brutal, and you saw all these other people having these loving experiences. So I don't know if you want to, quickly share what the brutal experience was like in its essence, and how that transferred how you worked with your integration coach, if you did, on that, and how that helped your life.
Right. Yeah, basically, well, the first night I would say I had just drank, let's say, like, if you want to call it like regular ayahuasca. The first night was the first time I ever drank. Nothing really happened, which is common, right? Like, it's more of like a cleansing of your system or whatever it is.
Right,
But I was more just like cranky and whiny and like, what the heck is this? But I had talked to the shaman at Solquat. Oh, he's not a shaman. He's a Taita Pedro. And, I had told him, like, nothing really happened last night. And, like, I just explained to him, and he, there was a translator there. And then, Taita Pedro had said, all right, when we have ceremony tonight, you're going to take your cup from me. And I was like, okay. But I didn't find out till later on that his stuff is yage, which is the more masculine, brutal, it's a more masculine form. I didn't know that's what I was getting. So when I drank, within like 10 seconds, I felt it like instantly. And I had a very, there's a very like male presence. There was nothing loving and nurturing and mothering. And I had actually I knew that I was in a mental prison, like not like a psych hospital, but like I was stuck in my own brain. And I was being shown all these things I had to solve. And the only way that I was getting out of it was if I solved these things, but they were being taken away from me before I could solve them. So I was like, oh my God, like, I'm never going to get out of this. I'm stuck in here forever. And there wasn't, like, a lot of people were like, why didn't you ask for help? And they don't get, like, I was so deep in it. Like, there was nothing else around me. I wasn't aware of like my body or the ground around me. It was only in here. It was only like brutal energy. And I had seen this like metal box on a planet which looked like the moon. And I'm like, oh my God, do metal boxes live on the moon? Like, holy crap. And long story short, I had ended up catching up with him later on. I had messaged him on Facebook, and I was like, I'm sorry to bother you. I was like, I sat with you like a year ago. I had this crazy experience. He's like, I didn't talk to you after. I was like, no. He's like, well, normally I do. And, I told him like, it was really brutal. And he said he could see that I needed a hard lesson. I was like, okay. But he explained that the metal box was my thoughts weighing heavy on me.
Interesting.
Like, okay, that makes perfect sense. And I said, well, I was in this prison. I was like, is the metaphor here like that I was in a self-creating prison of my own brain? Like I was limiting myself. And he's like, absolutely. He's like, you're imprisoning yourself by the way you're thinking.
Wow.
It was very, the way I can describe it, it was just a very heavy, unforgiving.
Felt unforgiving, huh?
Oh, it was relentless. People were like, oh, just say you surrender. And again, like, I didn't know what I was doing. So I was just like, okay, I surrender. Like, help me. Like, I don't know what to do. But it was just like, God awful. And the relief I felt when it went away, like I left out an important part. So on that night, it got so bad. At one point, I guess I just laid down. I was like a hot mess. I just like laid down on the ground, and I was just like, ugh, or whatever. I don't care. I see him standing over me at one point. He's looking at me, and I just felt so stupid, just like laying there on the ground, like, what the hell just happened?
Yeah.
I think he touched my forehead. He did something on my forehead, and in about like 20 seconds, I was back to planet Earth. I don't know what the heck he did. I asked him, he said that was his secret. He won't tell me. And I was just like, oh, thank God. Like I could see the world around me again. I was like, oh, like I felt, present again. I was like, Jesus, what was that? And then the next day was the rebirth. So finally when I had talked to him, through Messenger, I was like, I felt like I died. And then I had like a rebirth. And he said, that's the point in yage, you die. And then the next day you're reborn.
Wow.
I didn't know that. And what's the coolest thing for me is that was 3/24. Okay, so March 24th was my rebirth. Very next year, on March 24th, my niece was born.
Holy cow.
Yeah, and I'm like, I'm sorry, that is not a coincidence. Like, it's just, so of course, to me, she's like, I'm like, oh, this is my little precious, because I've always associate her with my rebirth, so my real birthday is in September, but I always say my second birthday is March 24th, which, I share with my niece. But but going back to what you were asking before, like you don't want to discourage people from having these crazy experiences. I always struggle with that because, I did drink one at another place after that where it was not as brutal at all. So I think that the state of mind I was in had a lot to do with it, obviously. Me expecting this cure right away. Like I was kind of demanding with it. Like I came here and, I'm doing this, so fix me, kind of thing.
Yeah.
Which is ridiculous because when people come to me like that, I'm like, there's no quick and dirty solution here. Like this is going to take time, but again, I didn't know that when I first started drinking, but, I do think it's important for people to start, if you can start the integration work before you start drinking, I think would be ideal. But then it's like, what do you tell people who might be like suicidal, and who needs something right away? But I've heard everything from, if somebody is suicidal, then they shouldn't be doing this. But I've also heard, no, like if they're suicidal, you might as well have them do it because, like what's the alternative? So people feel very differently about that. I don't know what the answer is. I definitely am not an expert on plant medicine. But I would say like talk to a few coaches and a few people, see what's right for you. Because a lot of people go into this like yourself, right? After something happens, like loss of someone they care for or divorce or whatever. So they're not in a good place when they go into it. So the argument there is, well, if you're not in a good place when you go into it, you're going to have a horrible trip, but then I've seen other people go into it, when I was there and they were like, hey, like I was in a terrible place and now I feel amazing. So I don't know what the answer is there.
Yeah, that's a tough. So people ask me about mindset and, they'll say, well, this bad thing just happened to me and maybe I'm not in the right mindset. And I say, well, mindset, in my opinion, and I'm not anybody, my mindset is about not how good is your life going right now or all that kind of stuff. It's, have you prepared your mind for the journey? Right. So because I think I'm an interesting case, just one case, not a study. You know what I mean? I'm just one example, but started this after the loss of my son, and it's hard to find much worse of a place to be in your heart and mind
Absolutely.
than that. But my mindset going into my first experiences was absolutely where it needed to be. I was prepared and I understood, and I had my whole set and setting lined up and meditation and all this stuff, and ended up having some very important and insightful journeys. So I guess that's my kind of 2 cents on that is, but somebody who's suicidal, again, I'm not a therapist, but might have them look at ketamine. Ketamine has had some really
absolutely
great results, to go there and kind of get that turned around. And maybe it's not a cure. And with ketamine, the period between taking the ketamine and when you start feeling bad again is shorter than it is with some other psychedelics. But it's a great way to get somebody who's got those suicidal ideation going to break them out of that and give them the opportunity to maybe explore some other options that will be better long-term solutions.
Right. To at least get that out of the way so you could, start to feel the sun a bit and then maybe make a decision from there.
Yeah. Yeah. Good point. So you went through all this. That's an amazing experience. Thank you for sharing that, first of all. How has this, you mentioned it earlier, I think, that it's helped you become a better therapist. So how did that play out in terms of your practice and your experiences? What has that brought to your therapy practice?
More of all the stuff that I thought was cheesy before, like affirmations and,
Yeah.
like when I would hear people talk about self-love, I think a lot of people don't understand what that is. Like, it's not going out and getting like your hair and nails done or getting a massage. It could be, right? But and that's self-care, but like self-love can also be sitting on the couch crying, saying, okay, like I had a horrible shit day today. I'm going to give myself compassion and say, like, I'm not beating myself up over this. Like, I'm just going to sit, I'm going to take some breaths, I'll have, maybe I'll put on the TV, Netflix, whatever, have, it's just having compassion for yourself, like saying, like, this isn't fun, but it's okay that I feel crappy. It's not fun to feel crappy, but I'm not going to beat myself up over it.
Yeah.
I think I was a little too overly clinical prior to this, and my intuition was always pretty sharp. I was pretty spot on. Like, even before people would tell me stuff in session, I kind of knew there was something else, either that they were leaving out, or I could just sense, okay, there's a dad issues or there's some sexual trauma. And I was almost always right. I could just kind of feel it. And then after I drank, it was kind of reinforcing me, like, you need to trust that more.
Yeah.
You need to trust what you're feeling more. And even like things that I wouldn't know, I would say, okay, like, you should try meditating, before ayahuasca. And after ayahuasca, I would say, okay, like, I would even actually guide them through it in a session, which, I don't do a ton. A lot of people don't like it when you look at them while they're doing it. But I would feel braver to go a little bit deeper in the actual session. Like, okay, let's do a meditation or whatever. Or just telling them, like, if this is what you feel, like, you need to follow it. So I was able to just tap into things deeper. And interestingly enough, a lot of people think this sounds like, oh, woo woo and cheesy, but I mean, I can tell you from my experience, this is true. You're going to attract clients who are on your level. Like, that's the way it is. So, before I had drank, I had a lot of people who, like, I think they just wanted to come in and just like bitch and complain. And like, sometimes that's necessary. Like, we all need to vent. We're all allowed to we can be grumpy and negative at times, but you can't stay there. Right. So after I drank, people were calling me that were more, oh, I meditate, or I was getting people who were more in line with what I was believing. And I was like, this is so cool. Like, I didn't even have to I didn't change any advertising. Like, I did nothing different, but the people that were coming to me were more on my level.
Wow.
And now, like, I'll do meditations now where I'll say, like, even if I close my eyes for 30 seconds and I'm like, I want to attract more people, more like-minded people, I'll just send that vibe out there. If nothing else, it's relaxing.
Nice.
So it absolutely changed my life. And, my only regret is not doing it sooner. Like, I wish I did it. 36, I think, at the time. I wish that I knew about it sooner. And I was like, I can't hide this. I need to tell people about, my experience. So.
Yeah. Excellent. So for people out there who are listening, you've made a lot of good points already. Start your integration work. Well, first of all, do integration work, right? Start it before your journey and then continue it after your journey. What, in addition to that, or expand on that, but what advice would you give somebody who's considering working with psychedelics, working with these medicines to help their situation? What are some things that you might, and again, we're not sitting here, you and I, telling people to go do this, right? Because there's precautions you got to take, and you got to understand this.
It's not for everyone.
Yeah, it's definitely not for everybody. So that is not the message. The message is, if you feel like you're being called to it, what are some things that, somebody came to you like that and said, okay, I've done all this research just like you did, Tara, and I'm ready to go. What should I know first before I go into it? What was some advice you would have for them?
I would probably, there's, some coaches that, I know in the community, and I would honestly probably even send them towards people who've worked in the medicine community, like try and work with a coach. I would just remind them, like, this is not going to be a cure-all. You have to deal with your stuff. You can't just rely on drinking. You have to still, be accountable for your own stuff. I think the integration work is critical. For me, like, I wouldn't have known. I didn't know the integration coaches like existed prior. I was like, okay, there's therapists, but like, I didn't know that there was people who specifically worked in that until I drank. So it's kind of like, it just kind of had to happen that way. But I would really just say, like, you need to find someone who can, help you like work through this kind of stuff. I wouldn't, like, where I am now, like, if somebody has maybe already drank, like, okay, like I could work with them, but I wouldn't want to be somebody's intro at this point, just because of, intro as a therapist, yes, but intro as somebody in that realm. I think that they need somebody who's more focused on that or more experienced than I am. Because there's some people know a lot more than I do, and I definitely would say, all right, you need to go to the right person for that.
Excellent. Now, you mentioned, I found it funny. I don't know if that's fair to you or not, but I found talking about your dad and your parents and like, should I tell my dad, or can I no, I'm going to tell him I'm doing an all women's yoga. And, it's, and then right from Florida having to say, yeah, Dad, that's what I did. What other examples, if any, have you dealt with in a stigma around psychedelics? Have you mentioned this to other people at a dinner party or at a professional meeting or, or something where people are kind of like look over at you like, oh my gosh, she's nuts, or whatever. Have you dealt with that?
You have to know your environment, right?
Yeah.
So I knew I needed to do something with it, but I was like, I have to get my stuff together first because that's more important. I'm not trying to. So I was like, I'm going to write a book about this. And then I was kind of like, no, Tara, like you can do that later, but you need to be okay first, So I was very careful of who to mention it around. I had a colleague, I won't mention her name because I don't know if she would want me to at this point, but we had worked in the same building, and I had said to her, she had dabbled in like herbs and things like that, more of the Eastern medicine. And I said to her, I was like, you keep talking about plant medicine. I was like, have you done anything kind of like in that realm? And then she was like, I did ayahuasca. And I was like, I did ayahuasca too. But I just felt right, and we are since very close, but
Nice.
But to me, it's just crazy about like something that's like so profound. Not a lot of people know about. And at first I had a hard time with that, but now I'm like, hey, it is what it is. Like their path is their path, But I did mention it. I went on a surf retreat in Costa Rica. I love the water and I just love being away, like by myself, just getting to do my own thing. And there were a couple of other girls there and I had talked about it. I was like, whatever, I don't know these people. So let me see what happens. And the way I was explaining it, I forgot what I said. I said, yeah, I know it kind of sounds a little like hippie-ish. She's like, yeah, it kind of does. But like, isn't that sad that like taking care of yourself and like basic self-care and self-needs sounds like hippie stuff? Like, because the hippie stuff I always associate with politics and a, like a movement, justice and, and things like that. And I mean, sure, there's like natural parts of hippie stuff, but I'm like, no, it's not. Like, this is healing. This is real. That this is medicine. This isn't hippie stuff, And I mean, I didn't get to into it with her a lot, but
yeah, we had that reaction that because it can throw you off, when you're in an environment with certain people, or whatever, and you bring it up almost with an expectation of like, oh, they're going to get it, they're going to understand. Maybe they never heard of it, but at least they'll be curious, maybe just a little bit, and then when they come back at you like, oh, that's hippie-ish, or something negative, it can kind of be like, oh, catch you by surprise.
Right. I try to put myself in their shoes. Like if I was hearing that, I probably thought I would think it would sounded that way too.
That's good.
Or if I was hearing it without the experience, then maybe I would think that too.
Yeah, it's understandable.
I think it's just how you carry yourself. Like I'm a professional, like I'm responsible. I have like, a job and, I can pay my bill. Like I'm not, like I'm okay.
Yeah.
So it's when they see you like, oh, like she was always a level-headed person. So
right.
She must know what she's talking about, and again, like when I enforce this, I'm not like, woo, I love tripping. I freaking hated it. I have a really hard time. Like I know some people who are like, I love ayahuasca. And I'm like, I was so crazy, dizzy, nauseous. Like I didn't get the visuals I saw. I couldn't like perceptually figure out where I fit into them, if it makes sense. Like I was just so dizzy and nauseous, and the visuals were just so overwhelming for me that I was like, I can't even like see it because I feel like so crappy. But there was definitely a level of resistance on my part that I'm sure affected it. I'm not saying never again, but it's just not something right now that I would want to do. Like people really need to take the time to integrate their stuff before like, okay, next month I'm going to do it again. I'm going to do it again the month after. Like you're not doing the work,
Yeah, I had an experience. It was a very short, powerful experience. It lasts about 20, 25 minutes. And at the end of it, the facilitator was like, do you want more? And I was like, no, I don't want more. I said, I have a whole lot of work to do. You know what I mean? I got so much that you might call it a download. I had so much come to me that I'm afraid if I did more, and it wasn't ayahuasca, but if I did more of it, then I would overwrite it like a floppy disk or something. I'm showing my age now, but I overwrite it like a floppy disk. And, I was like you said, you need time to work on it, let it settle in. And sometimes, you had the whole birth a day after the ayahuasca was essentially mostly gone. Right. And sometimes you'll have revelations or things will come to you days, weeks, after. So you do have to give yourself a chance to really understand what happened.
Oh, and I was so overwhelmed when I came back too. Like people will say like, oh, your sense of like smell and things are going to be enhanced. And it was just really funny. I came home and I had gotten this candle like weeks before, and I had never lit it, but it was just, I had it like on the dresser. And when I walked into my bedroom, I was like, what the heck was that smell? Like I was so overwhelmed with the smell. I was like, what is that? And then I got closer to the candle and I was like, it's the like it had heightened that so much. And even like pictures, like if there was a picture of like something bright or like a sun, I would look at the painting and I was like, oh God, like I'm like, what do I need to function. Like I can't be like overwhelmed by all of it. And I had gone into ShopRite. I was like, all right, I need tea because my stomach was off for like a couple of days afterwards. I walked past the fabric softener again, which normally I don't smell, but I didn't smell fabric softener. All I smelled was like chemicals. Like, so I was like, I know what's really in here. But it didn't smell nice. I was just like, ooh, like, and that was just that was the first weekend I ever drank. The second weekend, at a different place a couple months later, I did not have, it was just like a 10th of the level of the intensity it was the first time. So I don't know if it was because it was yage or because I wasn't like centered and grounded when I first did it. But it was overwhelming on like every level possible. Yeah.
Oh, excellent. Excellent. Well, as we wrap this up, what else do you want to share? Anything about your experiences, about your practice, any information? Is there anything I did not ask you? What else?
I think we pretty much covered everything. Yeah, again, I am not an expert on plant medicine. For everyone listening, don't look me up and say, hey, where can I, do this? Like,
Yes,
I'm
don't
just,
do that, people.
yeah, I'm more of I said, like, I'm a therapist. I do put a lot of like spirituality into my practice, but yeah, if you're having like a brutal time, like going through an experience with, like ayahuasca or mushrooms or something, I would say, like, go on, find the appropriate, whether it's like the ayahuasca integration on Facebook, or, find like a good source, find a good community support for that, people who have worked with that kind of medicine for, much longer. I'm still very much, kind of like in the earlier stages of the whole thing. So, yeah, just be careful if you're thinking about doing that. Like, again, do your research on the place, don't go crazy listening to everyone else's stories. Just, you need to get accounts from people saying this place was awesome, or I felt supported here, I felt cared for. They knew what I was talking about. They were able to guide me through stuff. You need to feel safe, bottom line.
Yeah, gotta feel safe and know you're around the right people. They are going to look out for you.
Right. I mean, from my experience, it's like I feel like most environments are loving, but you don't want to find out about a place and book it the next day. You really gotta
do your research.
Get accounts from people that they're doing well.
Yeah, good, excellent advice. Well, Tara, thank you so much for doing this. I really appreciate you.
Thanks for inviting me.
Yeah, it was a real pleasure. That concludes this edition of the Stoned Ape Reports. Thank you for listening. Please follow us on Instagram at Stoned Ape Comedy and subscribe to our newsletter at www.stonedapecomedy.com. Again, thanks for listening, and catch you next time, Stoned Apes.